Welcome to Loco Listens.
Welcome to Loco Listens.
You're listening to Loco Listens.
You're listening to Loco Listens.
Loco Listens.
Welcome to Loco Listens.
Welcome to Loco Listens.
Welcome to Loco Listens.
Loco Listens.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm here with my friend Ben, my new friend. We first interacted on Twitter, and I first saw him on the Expanding Reality podcast with Brandon Thomas. Hello, Brandon Thomas. Anyways, Ben is known as the Anomaly Hunter, and we've connected through Instagram. We've been chatting a bit, and I'm really excited that we finally got to have this time now to have a discussion about many cool topics, and I'm very excited to get to learn more about Ben's backstory and how he became the Anomaly Hunter, which is a really cool title, by the way. So, Ben, welcome, man. How's it going today?
It's going great. Going awesome. Thank you for having me, Jake. I'm really excited to get another chance to talk about cool stuff. It's not like very often in my regular life I find people that want to talk about aliens and UFOs and ancient history very often. You know, most people out there, it's funny. I'll just start by saying this. Most people out there don't know anything about the subject of the recent Pentagon UFO disclosure. Like,
yes.
I'm sure you've seen the videos. Like, all of us in this community, like, we've seen the F-18 fighter videos, the Tic Tac, the Go Fast. You know, we've read all the articles, the headlines. You know, it's a huge deal for us. The UAP report, all that. But what I find is strange, if you bring this up to any just random person, chances are they do not know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah. And I believe you're referring to the summer of 2021 when they released these documents, and I was very excited for it. And I remember, I followed Disclosed TV on Twitter, and they were kind of hyping it up, like, guys, it's coming. And then they were the ones to be like, oh, just kidding. It was kind of 50 pages of not much information. But
you're talking about the UAP report.
Yeah,
it is very light on details.
Very light.
So I know we all want the nitty-gritty details, but
yeah.
It was interesting. You have to look into it. They basically do confirm UFOs, at least in this small little selection we're looking at. They're at our military installations, and we currently have no idea what they are. And they said they looked at 140 different cases.
Yeah.
And all of them are unexplained, and they're all happening at our most sensitive military installations, and they're being picked up by multiple sensors. It's not just one guy saw this thing. No, these things are tracked by radar. They're seen visually. They're, operating over restricted airspace, and apparently we don't have the technology to shoot them down or even catch up to them, which is pretty mind-blowing if you think about that's. I know there's been a lot of media coverage. That's kind of where the media has dropped the ball. They're like, oh yeah, the government is saying these UFOs are real. We have these videos, but what they're not saying is we have a video. Let's say the TikTok. It's just hovering there. It's still, and then it shoots off. It shoots off at speeds that would kill any living occupant.
Right.
And we don't have that acceleration. And, I'm sure if you've studied the Tic Tac, it's they captured this thing on radar going from 30,000 feet to sea level instantaneously.
Oh, my God.
So, it's incredible. And really, I think it's probably the most important news story of our lives. And most people just don't care anymore. It's it's like Jurassic Park. It's oh, UFOs. No one cares. See, everyone, woo, UFOs. Who cares?
Right. I'm glad that you brought that up. We're definitely going to get into that
Frustrating.
sort of stigma for sure. I'd love to hear your take on it. And it's cool that you brought up the UAP report just to kind of wrap that. Because, like, if people haven't read it, and I did read it in the summer of 2021, and you're absolutely correct that it's like they did confirm one truth that I think we were all waiting to hear, which was there are a bunch of sightings or anomalies that are unexplainable, and the government basically owned up to it and said like, well, some of them could be military aircraft and this and that, and then there's a separate category that we just cannot explain. So I think people, if even though there wasn't much in the report in terms of details, like you said, it's still like, well, that is something. So Ben,
yeah, it's crazy.
go ahead, you can say something. Yeah, go for it.
I mean, yeah, the UAP report, like, you have to kind of like read in between the lines a little bit about what they're really trying to say here. And they're like, we have 5 potential categories. It's like our own technology, foreign technology, bizarre weather phenomenon. And the final category is like other. And it's just like any kind of, that would encapsulate aliens, craft of unknown origin completely. And the thing is, they cannot say it was any category. They're just saying these are the possibilities. Like, but I think, I don't know, if it was China or Russia and they're out there and they have these crazy advanced craft that are, operating at will in all of the nuclear silos, military bases, like, that's bad news for us. Like, I don't think that's worse than it's just aliens. And if it's aliens, I actually see that as a very, very positive thing. I don't think that they're here to hurt us. And the fact that they have taken such an interest in all of our nuclear facilities, to me, my whole take on that is, if you go back to Roswell, Roswell was people wonder, like, why Roswell? What was so important? And so Roswell was the home of the 509th bombing group, the same group that bombed Japan in World War II. And in 1947, they were the only nuclear-powered strike group in the world. They were the only place that had planes and nukes that could go and like deliver them a payload somewhere. So at the time, I would say Roswell was probably the most dangerous military base on the planet. So it perfectly makes sense why, like, aliens after World War II, they witnessed the nukes and they became very concerned. And so then after that, they started to try and like monitor us. And I kind of think if there are these aliens and they're at our nuclear facilities, they could easily destroy us. Like, they could wipe us out, but they don't want to. Like, I would say their whole reason for being here now is to make sure we don't blow up our planet.
Yeah, it kind of seems
probably
like
their
that.
number one mission at this point.
Yeah.
We have a pretty crazy, dangerous world these days. Like, we all know there's, Vladimir Putin sending out threats like every week about nukes in the last couple months. It's pretty crazy. But, I think the UFO phenomenon is definitely, like, if you're an alien, you came here from who knows where, from out in the universe, and you've probably seen a lot of other cool, like, Earth-like planets. You've probably seen a bunch of them, but the fact is, like, we don't know, but our planet might be one of the best ones out there. It might be one of, like, the coolest, one of the most conducive to life. So, it's probably a pretty special and rare planet in the cosmos. And I know I'm well aware that there's supposed to be like hundreds of thousands of Earth-like planets out there.
There's that Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, I believe that fully, but who's to say our planet still isn't like pretty special?
Yeah,
I think it really could be.
Yeah, from a very humanizing perspective, I feel the same way, especially when I go out into nature. I feel like I'm connected with the most special thing in the entire scope of existence, which is nature itself. And speaking of going back down to earth, and I do want to get back to this, but I have a ritual first question for all guests on the Local Listens podcast. So I'm glad that you are here, Ben. And your first question is, when did you start to speak your truth?
Oh, man, that's a pretty good question. I don't know. Anyone who kind of like knows me in real life know that I'm the guy who will like ramble about UFOs for hours and talks about all this crazy stuff. But no, I haven't really been like in the public arena talking about this stuff for very long. It's only been pretty recently that I created my accounts for Anomaly Hunter and started posting stuff and contributing to the community. And yeah, it's only about last year I made the accounts and everything and published my book and everything. So yeah, I guess, does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the beauty of that question is there's no right or wrong answer. Of course, like it's your personal story and your journey. And I'm glad that you've decided to put yourself out there. And I think you were telling me earlier that this is only the third or fourth time that you've ever been on a podcast, right?
Third one. Yeah.
Third one. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Good things happen in threes, my friend. And I would love to hear more about your book. So if anyone is wondering, can you give us a little information about the book and where we can find it, what it's called, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so my whole reason for being on these podcasts is because I wrote a book, and I think you saw me on Expanding Reality, and that was the first one I ever did. But yeah, so I recently wrote a book. It came out in February, and the book is on Amazon. Yeah, it's called The Last Dinosaur of the Lost World, and it is available on Amazon. And yeah, it's this book that I would describe it as investigative journalism or narrative journalism, because I'm kind of like telling my own story in it. And it's kind of about how very long time ago I heard this very interesting story posted on a message board. So it's about this guy who writes up this big long post about 20 years ago, and he's an explorer. He lives in Venezuela, and he's out there exploring this unexplored mountain, but it's actually well known because it's where the tallest waterfall in the world is. It's called Angel Falls.
Angel Falls.
And yeah, it's this amazing, incredible place, but it's so isolated that it's like no one really goes there except to look at the waterfalls.
Right.
Yeah, it's up on this like really big mountain. That's a flat tabletop mountain. And that's where I got the Lost World reference, because this was the exact place that inspired Arthur Conan Doyle to write his famous book. And his idea was that like you have an isolated tabletop mountain. So whatever is up there is like a separate world from whatever is down below. And species up there have to be like completely cut off from the rest of nature. They can't get down, right? So whatever is up there has to be like very unique. And it turns out he was right. But anyway, back to my book. It's basically about yeah, so the explorer, he hears a very strange story that's told to him by a hermit. And the hermit is talking about a strange animal he's seen up on the top of the mountain. And the animal has a long neck, it has flippers, and it sounds a lot like a plesiosaurus. So it's very strange, and he doesn't know what to make of this story. So he goes up and he camps out, and he eventually spots this animal. He sees it up there. It supposedly lives like by a lake or in the rivers up there. And yeah, he writes this very long-winded post, and he tells his story. He actually snaps a picture of it before he leaves, and he says, "Look, I think this thing is a dinosaur. It's one of these plesiosaurus or plesiosaurus-like creatures that's still alive up in the lost world." And he says, "There's actually other people who've seen it. There's a professor and there's a pilot." And that was the end of the post. And this was a pretty long time ago that I ran across this post, and I just thought it was amazing, and I thought it was very interesting. And I don't know, it's kind of one of those crazy stories that you hear about, but you don't really quite know what to make of it. Like, you don't know if it's true or not. But my book, basically, I started to look into it more. I started to like do some digging about the story. I found a lot of information about the hermit. I found a lot of information about the author of the post. And then I wanted to just basically find out if I could confirm from as many people who have seen this interesting, weird creature.
Right.
If it was real, like, and if people would be willing to actually tell this story to the world, because no one's heard about this one, and it's pretty fascinating case. So yeah, my book basically is about me tracking down these people, like the scientists, the pilots, and there's a couple other interesting people I talked to in my book. But it's I want to find out, did this guy make up the whole story, or is it true, or what's going on here? So that's what my book is about. And if you read the book, I don't want to like get into all the statements that
Right.
Most of the people I talk to are very smart, very professional people. And like, for example, the pilot, he actually owns one of the biggest aeronautical companies in Venezuela.
Interesting.
He's this guy who's a pilot for 30 years. He has all this experience. And, people like that you tend to take pretty seriously when they say they've seen something. Like, this isn't some amateur bush pilot. No, this is a guy with years of experience who's a manager at a big company. So
okay, wow. It's very fascinating too that you were guided by this sense of curiosity. Like, all it takes is one internet post, whether it was like Reddit or wherever you had found it, and then that led to this whole rabbit hole where you were able to write your own book and kind of highlight this process. And I'm curious, when you were going through the process of writing this book, what was the most challenging part? Because like, I'm sure it was tough to track down some of these people and get a hold of them, but also when you were learning about this area in Venezuela and the Angel Falls and sort of this super remote part of the globe that is, it's probably very, very difficult to track people down who have been up there or who have had firsthand experience. So what else was challenging when you were investigating and then also writing the actual book? What did you struggle with?
Yeah, you're right. Like, this case, it's so like kind of small, and not very many people out there have even been there. So it's kind of a challenge to find anyone with any information. And I don't know, I ended up looking into the whole science route a lot as well, because I wanted to find out, like, according to geology, according to all the scientific explanations, like, do we have creatures up there? Like, it doesn't have to be a dinosaur, but do we have like any other creature that's been found in that area that is unique? And it's pretty crazy, actually.
Yeah.
Like, there's been a few expeditions and one big paper that was published about their findings, and I'm pretty sure they estimate there's over 100 of these types of big lost world tabletop mountains in Venezuela. They're almost all of them are completely untouched and like unexplored. but the kind of like consensus out there is that the plants and animals that live up on these mountains, over half of them are unique to these tabletop mountains. Like they do not exist down below. They're only up there in the mountains. And they found some very interesting things, like as far as plants and animals, and definitely a couple of lizards and frogs, I want to say, that are unique, and possibly a snake as well that do not exist anywhere else in the world.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It always kind of reminds me
Doyle
of...
is right, by the way.
So Arthur Conan Doyle, you had mentioned him, and you mentioned that the Angel Falls was associated with one of his most famous books. Can you let us know which book you're referring to?
His book, The Lost World.
The Lost World.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the plot of that book is an explorer is out in the Amazon. And he finds this Lost World mountain, and he's they see dinosaurs up there, and then they go on this big expedition, and it's all about the idea that this prehistoric dinosaur populated world exists out in the middle of the jungle,
right,
on an isolated mountain.
Yeah,
there's been a couple like TV adaptations, TV show, I think a movie a long time ago.
Yeah, it's pretty funny too.
I think it's about high time someone does one. Like the last one was from the 90s and pretty bad special effects, but it's a really good book, and
yeah,
someone needs to redo it.
Well, my father and I recently watched The Lost City of Z, which was, I think it was based on a book as well, and based on a true story.
The Lost City of Z.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Have you seen that? Have you read it?
Yeah, that's an interesting book. Very interesting book.
Yeah, I'm part of that. Yeah.
I think that their idea that there's a civilization from the Amazon, I think they're really onto something there, because recently they found these very cool earthen structures out there in the Amazon rainforest, like these big circular structures, these big like artificial mounds and like canals and stuff like that. And these things were obviously like created by a civilization that lived out there. And like all the early settler reports and stuff, they all describe like a massive amount of people living out in the Amazon. Like they say, like on some of the first expeditions up the river, there are just hundreds of people everywhere. Right. And I don't know, man, like something must have happened that like some kind of epidemic or something happened for sure out there. And it's interesting. I think personally that there absolutely 100% is a lost civilization. And they found these crazy Mayan ruins in the rainforest using LiDAR technology. And what that is it's basically a laser scan that cuts through all the trees and all the vegetation. And it shows what is beneath all the jungle, basically, and on the ground. And they found a lot of these like really amazing Mayan ruins. And one cool story I read about was a teenager. He was looking at Mayan ruins and maps of Mayan ruins. And according to the theory, the Mayans laid out their whole empire according to star maps. Ooh. So like every single city corresponds to a certain star group or constellation, and it like maps out the whole sky.
Wow.
And all their cities fit in there. So this teenager is looking into it, and he's like, well, there's nothing here, but according to the star maps, there should be something right here. And so he pinpoints this area via GPS. And I don't know like how he did it, but he got funding. And they did a LiDAR scan, and what do you know? There's a giant ruin, like unknown ruin in that exact location. So
instantly reminds me of as above, so below, it's like, and what we're seeing on the surface, whether you're looking at the Aztecs or the Mayans, the Peruvian monuments that are left behind, it's like we can see this above the surface, but who knows what's been, I mean, you could say buried or just lost to the growth of the Amazon, which is such a force in and of itself. And it reminds me of so many other
Yeah.
areas. Like there's the Siberian wilderness, and like that, the Russian wilderness is one area that is so unexplored, or I guess, we have unidentified areas all over this
Yeah.
planet, throughout China, even Alaska and Canada. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of,
Yeah.
so like when people think about like UFOs and aliens and other planets, I do love talking about those topics, but it is also good to recognize how much of the surface of the earth is untouched or unexplored. Like the Galapagos Island at one point was just like that. And then you also mentioned the UFO stories about being connected to the ocean, which is another layer of our reality that is hard to
Yeah,
wrap
dude.
our minds around.
There's so much that we don't know about our own planet. Like there's okay, so just today, was it May 7th? Big article pops up in my news feed. They've apparently found the most significant cave art discovery in all of North America today. There's a press release out there, so look it up. They found it in this cave in Kentucky, and so far they've only released a few images, but yeah, one of them shows like a very tall, like, I don't know how to describe him. It's like a humanoid. And then there's another one that's like a owl type figure or something like that. But yeah, they're just like, oh my God, this is the biggest cave art in all of North America. Today they found it, or released the findings of it.
Wow, okay.
Go look that up.
Gotta look that up. In Kentucky, you said?
Yeah, Kentucky. It's kind of interesting to me that they found it in Kentucky of all places.
Yeah. Wow, man.
It is very well known for massive amounts of unexplored cave systems. You have the Mammoth Cave system out there. And, those caves are pretty like unstable. A lot of them, there's like collapses, things are like getting cut off all the time. So yeah, they said it was a unnamed cave they found this art in. And yeah, it makes you wonder like what is in those caves that we don't know about.
Yeah, it's very fascinating to speculate or to explore who these people were that were creating this kind of cave art. And I also, I want to invite you to explore your own understanding of American history. And when we think about, I mean, I went through public school education and I was given a certain narrative, and it began with, and this has been further debunked, which is kind of funny, but back when I was in high school, they always taught us about the Bering Land Strait, the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest, and
Bering Land Strait.
People walked across it and then slowly and surely made their way south as if there was no one there.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah. So when you think about the story of the US or the North American continent, South America too, this area, are there any stories or any points of interest that have made you question that official narrative, including the fact that the Europeans apparently, allegedly, I still think it's kind of bullshit, honestly, that the European colonists found the Native Americans living in teepees and that they were considered to be so primitive? But it's hard for me to accept that because it seems like they were much more advanced than we were led to believe. What are your thoughts?
No, our whole narrative of humans coming over via the Bering Land Strait, I think that is slowly being like proven false. And I don't know, there's been a bunch of discoveries here in North America and Canada. I think one of interest, I don't have the exact dates on this one, but the Clovis Man, and also one in California. I want to say it was like a settlement they found that was about 26,000 years old.
Wow.
And that's extremely old in terms of North American history. And like, I don't know, for that to have existed, that there would have had to have been people here long before is generally accepted. And yeah, I think in particular, if you want to get into the South American continent, there's a lot of strange stuff there.
Yeah.
Architecture and all that. So we have the Incas. We know about the Incas, and then we have this kind of like strange concept of the pre-Incas, and they don't really like want to tell you too much about who they were or what they did, but I don't know. It's funny if you look at a lot of these Incan ruins, and then you look below the Incan ruins, the stuff on like the foundation level is incredible. It's made out of these megalithic stones that are incredibly big, and they all are kind of like irregularly shaped, but they all fit together like a big puzzle piece perfectly, like so perfectly that you cannot fit like a piece of paper in between these stones.
Just stunning precision.
Yeah, if you want to look up Sacsayhuaman is one pretty cool example, or Ollantaytambo, I might be saying that wrong.
You might have to give me the spellings of that. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to Google that. I can write it down though.
Yeah, this architecture in those two sites, I think that modern science cannot explain how it was built whatsoever. It's people will tell you, oh, they must have like shaped each stone so precisely, and they're all different shapes, and they all fit together perfectly, and they're all like way over a ton. And most people who look at that one say it looked like it was created by some sort of stone smelting technology, like they must have melted down the stone.
Interesting.
Them into shape.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And then of course we have Bolivia. We have I'm trying to remember what's called. We have the area in Gate of the Sun. Are you familiar with that one?
No, this is the first time I've ever heard it. This is the Gate of the Sun in Bolivia, you said?
All right, I got it. It's called Pumapunku. So Pumapunku is probably, in my opinion, the most impressive ancient site in the world. They have stone cuts there that were obviously machine drilled. And these things are so incredibly old, like even like the most ancient records, people say this was built long ago before any like of the modern ruins were made. And yeah, they have stones that like there's drill holes in them, there's precise cuts, there's all these like perfectly straight lines, and it like goes inside of the stone at all these right angles. And yeah, they measured like a couple of these slabs that are just so incredibly precise. They have taken readings, and apparently some of these giant stone slabs are more level than a sheet of glass in your window. Like that's the level of precision we're talking.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's and apparently archaeologists will tell you that one was made by people with nothing like more technological than chicken bones and like a little
it's hard to believe.
Chisel.
It's very hard to believe. And that's the same reason why people are so interested in the Tartaria theory, because if they look around buildings, whether it's like even here in North America, like if you look at the Capitol buildings or some of the things that are in Washington, D.C., or all the way out west in San Francisco, it's like, all right, like I can imagine people nowadays building those things, but back then with a horse and buggy and with dirt roads, and in some cases are not even like very like they're like muddy roads. Like how in the world were those structures built? And it's gonna puzzle us forever. But
yeah, disclaimer, I don't know too much about it yet, but yeah,
me neither. It's just something that's been coming up quite a lot. Yeah.
The guy, the Great Deception podcast.
Yeah, Matt is awesome.
Matt Turillian, he kind of like breaks it all down for you, and
the World's Fairs and everything like that.
I don't know much about it, but it's pretty crazy to me they were able to build all these structures in less than a year a lot of the time without power tools. That's the thing that gets me. Like, I don't really understand it too well, like how it's even possible. And I guess the theory is a lot of these World Fair buildings, they were actually not brand new structures. They were very, very old structures that were just renovated. That's why they were able to create them in such record speed.
Yeah, that's
But
what I thought of when you brought up the foundation level of some of these monuments in the Incan Empire, how it's like
yeah,
on the foundation, there was something already there, and then people were able to build on top of that. But it's still still hard to wrap our
yeah.
minds around any of it. And
Yeah, it's
I'm
pretty like
yeah.
weird. The same thing is in Egypt. Like
Mhm.
the older the structures are, the better they're built, the more
Yeah,
precise.
ironic.
You go up and it gets worse and worse. And yeah,
So
that
earlier,
kind of
Ben, you had mentioned some of these ruins in the Amazon line up with the stars, and we had this as above, so below moment, and that's also true with the pyramids and Orion's belt, right? It's those
yeah,
three
the Orion's
three
belt and
keys.
the Great Pyramids,
Now, I want to ask you
as well
this.
as
Some
Pac
people are
Pyramid.
familiar with the Sumerians and their knowledge of the stars and how they've been able to map out a lot of astronomical data that seem to be unbelievable that they were able to have this information at that time. Even though we have this sort of
Right.
a limited perspective where we think, oh, because we're in the modern day that we were smarter or more technological than these people were. But anyways, given that that truth that the Sumerians did have this information and the Egyptians were able to build these structures, or whoever, maybe it wasn't the actual Egyptians, we're going to leave that up for speculation. But fact is that these structures were built in alignment with the heavenly bodies, the constellations, the stars. And I've heard about the story of the Anunnaki, and I know that Ancient Aliens has been a very popular show and topic. I personally have never seen Ancient Aliens, but I'm very familiar with the meme of the everyone knows like that guy. I
Yeah,
forgot his name. He's holding up his hands and
Giorgio.
yep.
Yeah,
I feel like that
Giorgio.
guy all the time. But I was curious if you wanted to get into the story of the Anunnaki and kind of fill us in with what you think about that particular side of the historical timeline and what that leads us into.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the whole thing about the civilizations having this advanced astronomy and all this knowledge, there's a particular cylinder seal from the ancient Sumerians that I find pretty crazy. It's a cylinder seal that shows a complete model of our solar system. We have all the planets, we have them revolving the sun. There's a pretty interesting mathematical breakdown where they show the relative sizes of the planets kind of correspond. It's like they know which ones were bigger, which ones were smaller. It's all in there, and it's pretty impressive that the first civilization in the world knew all this stuff. It's pretty crazy. And yeah, so if you want to talk about the Anunnaki, you have to go way back to 5,000 years ago, maybe like 3,000 BC. We have the Sumerians, and they were the first civilization in the world according to all the history books. And they gave us pretty much everything we have that we think of as civilization. They invented writing, they invented mathematics, they invented government, money, like architecture, all this stuff. It all goes back to the Sumerians. And so the thing about the Sumerians is, according to all of their writing, and there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of ancient tablets, and cuneiform is their language. They talk very, very extensively about the Anunnaki, which means those who came down from above, essentially. And many times that civilization and all of their knowledge, agriculture, all their like reading and writing, it was taught to them by the gods. This is like their direct translations. They say, kingship was lowered down from heaven, for example. And they say, like, our gods taught us reading, writing, mathematics, everything we have. And yeah, this all goes into the theory that was put out there by Zachary Sitchin, was the first one to write some books about it. He said that it makes a lot more sense if you think about these gods as actual extraterrestrials or aliens. Because basically their story, like there's a bunch of tablets out there that tell the story. It's pretty similar to what you have in the Old Testament. It's actually, a lot of people say the Old Testament was based off of these Sumerian writings. It's all in there. They have basically the gods are on Earth. The Anunnaki are there, and they are working on Earth. It doesn't tell you what they're doing there, but they're creating these structures, this irrigation. They say they're digging canals and stuff out in Mesopotamia in the Middle East. And yeah, if you think about it, that's a pretty dry, arid region. And some of these like rivers out there are very important. And so according to like multiple tablets, the worker gods, they grew sick of their hard work and they kind of had a revolt. And they go to their leaders and they say, like, we are dying from this hard work, we're sick of it, and we refuse to work anymore. So the advanced beings, the rulers, they come up with this plan, and they said, we will create a worker being. And there's actually a bunch of different texts that talk about the creation, kind of how there's trial and error at first. They kind of like made some weird, like misshapen, like people who couldn't see, people who had all these disabilities. And then they finally got one that was pretty much what they wanted. And so, yeah, according to all the most ancient writings on the planet, the gods created us to perform their labor, essentially. And yeah, it all kind of ties into the Old Testament as well, because not too long after that, we have multiple accounts of there being a great flood. And we have the Sumerian Noah, who's in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And he basically, yeah, he tells the same story. The gods were angry with humanity. They were making too much noise. The gods decide to send a flood, and they tell this one guy, Ziasudra is his name in there, and they tell him to build an ark and everything. And he goes and he survives this great flood, and everything is destroyed, and everything has to start again after all that. So, yeah, that's about my basic understanding of it. But yeah, it's all pretty interesting to me because specifically the stories of the flood, they're talked about all over the place. They're talked about they're talked about in Egypt. A lot of people don't realize that Egypt has the same flood story. Yeah, even the Aztecs talk about the flood. Native Americans talk about the flood. It's pretty much this universal story. And yeah, in my opinion, that was a historical fact that happened. And so let me compose myself for a moment.
Sure. And if I can add something in while you think, hopefully this doesn't distract you, but it's when you said this, I recently stumbled across really cool artistic renditions of the pyramids and how they were underwater. There was this flood that swept through Egypt, and when I saw that, and I know there have been chats, like I first heard this on the Joe Rogan Experience, where there was there was research, I think it was by Robert Schoch, and it was talking about the water damage on the Sphinx and the pyramids, and how it's basically confirmed that the pyramids were around through the flood era, or the Diluvian times, and
the Sphinx for sure.
Sphinx for sure.
That's what it was. Yeah.
And I'm wondering, I mean, maybe it wasn't the pyramids, maybe it was just the Sphinx, but do you think the pyramids themselves were like a Noah's Ark type of structure, or do you have any other theories on the pyramids? Because you did mention before we hit record that you wanted to discuss your your take on the pyramids, and I'm wondering if this is a good segue. What do you think?
Sorry, you were cutting out for a second there on the Wi-Fi. Can
Okay.
you repeat the last question?
Sure. So just to bring it back, just so we get everything, we're thinking about the Sphinx having water damage and the fact that this flood that passed through Egypt, it was definitely it definitely was happening after the fact that the Sphinx was built, and maybe the pyramids too. I couldn't be sure, but I wanted to ask you, what is your take on why the pyramids were built or the Sphinx, and if you had a different take on what they were built for? Because when I first saw these images of the pyramids underwater, I was like, well, maybe that was the ark that was built. It just wasn't built the way that we thought it was going to look, like a normal ship. But what do you think about the pyramids and the Sphinx?
Yeah, so the Sphinx, Dr. Robert Schoch, he's a geologist from Boston University, and he is taken out to Egypt by John Anthony West, like alternative history guy. And so he said, like, within the first minute he says, this is clearly water erosion, like the Sphinx itself and the enclosure. The only time there was enough water or rainfall in Egypt to create that much water was probably around, I want to say 12,000 years ago. So,
wow,
that's minimum. He says this place has been here for a long time. And he publishes a paper about it, and there's a lot of controversy because Egyptologists are very upset about this theory. They say this is impossible. Like, where's all the other evidence? Like, we would have more similar places around the world if this is really true. Like, what civilization even is responsible? So fast forward to, I want to say about 10 years later, we have Göbekli Tepe, which is this structure in Turkey. And Göbekli Tepe is confirmed to be the oldest megalithic architecture in the world. And they estimate minimum it was 11,600 years old is when the whole site was buried. And to me, that's a pretty interesting date because that's the exact date that Plato gives for the destruction of Atlantis. And it kind of all lines up there. This very, very interesting date, 11,600 years ago. And so why would they bury a structure like Göbekli Tepe? What was the purpose? In my opinion, there could only be one reason, and that's because impending natural disaster, and you want to preserve that place or protect it somehow for future generations. And they were able to carbon date the soil that the whole place is buried on. It does show this exact time it was all buried. So it's pretty interesting. And I'll go back to 11,600 years ago. We get into this very interesting time that says Atlantis was destroyed. And that also happens to be the exact time, according to geological records, that the ice levels on the ice age in planet Earth plummeted. We have this sudden drop around that time period. It goes from all this ice worldwide to almost no ice very, very suddenly around that time period. So that's what's known as the Younger Dryas period.
Right.
It's supposedly the end of the last ice age. And it all apparently happened very, very fast. And, we're in North America right now. And what's interesting is North America used to be covered in ice. It used to be covered in, out in the Midwest, you would have glaciers that were 2 miles tall, covering the whole continent, essentially. And that was pretty recently, about 12,000 years ago. And then it all melted very fast and very suddenly. And the theory that has been proposed is this didn't happen just by melting. There was a catastrophe that occurred, either some kind of solar flare or, let's say, a giant comet hitting the ice sheet. And let's say you have a doomsday-sized comet and it strikes right in the middle of the continent. What's that going to do? It will instantly vaporize 2 miles of ice covering the continent. And that's going to cause all of the catastrophic flooding. That's going to cause a mile of water like coming at you and basically destroying everything that there was. So, people want to talk about the Great Flood of the Bible or what the Sumerians or Atlantis. This is all checks out to me as being caused by this one event in this one point in history, 11,600 years ago. It's a very important date. And that's where the whole flood mythology comes from. And it was a real event. And it, whatever was there before, if there was anything like civilization or like structures, it was all destroyed. Like there's no question.
But Göbekli Tepe was one place where people may have had prior warning to this event, or maybe they were able to predict it or see it coming, and then they wanted to preserve this area to make sure that someone found it eventually. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And so what's pretty crazy is Göbekli Tepe is like very, very close to Mount Ararat in Turkey. And what was Mount Ararat known for? That is, according to the Bible, the location that Noah's Ark landed on after the flood.
Yep.
So, the whole theory is that Göbekli Tepe has to tie into Noah somehow. And when you look at the actual ruins there, we have these like circular pits, and they're like kind of surrounded by big walls and all this stone structure. And in the middle, you have a big block. And they have a lot of cool drawings there of animals and animals that would not have necessarily existed in Turkey at the time. So it's pretty strange. Like they have a bunch of carvings, all sorts of animals. People have said it's kind of a calendar site. It's connected to the zodiac in some way. But personally, I think it has to be connected to this global catastrophe and this flood. And, I don't really know exactly what was going on there, but, we have.
Well, it sure is fun to talk about. I would say that. Yeah.
Yeah. We have Mount Ararat right by there. So it has to be connected somehow, in my opinion.
That is fascinating, man. And I do want to make sure we get this in here before we wrap up. So there was a lot thrown at you in these recent questions. So let's focus.
Yeah, I got a little segue.
That's all right. Yeah, man. No, you're a fascinating storyteller, by the way. Like, I'm excited to have you back on. You're welcome back on here anytime, man. And what I want to ask you as we wrap up, I have a couple more questions for you, but the first one I want to get into is, what was your theory on the pyramid? So we had a really cool talk on Göbekli Tepe, and you mentioned the Sphinx and the water damage from the research of Robert Schoch and John Anthony West. But you had mentioned before we had started recording that you had quite a unique take on the pyramids, or at the very least a theory that is not often discussed. So would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Great Pyramid and pretty much all the it's pretty hilarious. If you like our textbooks, like historians, they all say these were the tombs of the pharaohs, despite the fact the pharaohs were not buried in these structures. There's the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. That's where a lot of these pharaohs were buried. They've never found a mummy in a pyramid in Egypt. That hasn't really happened. So the fact of the matter is, the whole notion of these structures being tombs is outright ridiculous. There's zero supporting evidence of that, basically. And even the time the Great Pyramid was supposedly built, the only reason they say that is because there was like some graffiti inside the Great Pyramid. It was written like in ash, not even an official inscription. And it mentioned the pharaoh Khafra, I believe is how you say it. And so they attribute the pyramid to him, even though there's no evidence of that other than one papyrus stating that around that time there's some work being done on the pyramid. That's all said. Like, doesn't say they were building it. I think more likely they were probably just renovating it a little bit back then. But so yeah, it's kind of this strange mystery that we have all these pyramids and they weren't tombs. And then one theory in our community is a lot of people want to say that these pyramids were power plants or some way connected to electrical earth energy and generated all this power. And you have the piezoelectric effect. It's where stones, and in particular quartz, is a highly conducive material, and it generates all the static electricity. And then you have like the flowing water and chambers underneath the pyramid, and that adds to the static electricity. So yeah, there's been some really, really good work out there, like kind of exploring this idea that the Great Pyramid was a massive type of power plant, and somehow it transmitted wireless electricity throughout the region. But I don't know. I don't believe that per se, but I think they're on the right track. I think these pyramids had a very special purpose. And we look at the pharaohs themselves. And what are the pharaohs? The pharaohs, according to the Egyptians, are the intermediaries between man and the gods. They are appointed by the gods. That is the only reason why they have kingship over the land, is because they are acting on behalf of the will of the gods. So in my opinion, the real purpose of the pyramids, they were basically these massive structures that the pharaoh or some high member of the priesthood would go into for initiation ceremonies.
Right.
Specifically, the purpose of them was to induce an out-of-body experience. So we have Robert Schoch, we were talking about him earlier. He has stated, and I think this has been proven, that going inside the Great Pyramid alters your brain waves. Like, it puts you in almost like this kind of trance state. It puts you in a theta from beta brain waves, I believe.
Right.
Account of Napoleon, he went into the Great Pyramid. He spent the night in the king's chamber, and he said he had a terrifying experience that he could not explain whatsoever. And he was really freaked out by that. And you want to think about the king's chamber in there. It's basically this big room, and you have this large granite box. And that box was supposed to be the tomb of the pharaoh, even though there's no body in there. But in my opinion, it's kind of more like a sensory deprivation pod. Like, someone would go in there, and then due to all this electricity going on, due to this artificial trance state, what would happen is you could very easily have an out-of-body experience. You could astral project, basically. And yeah, it made it very, very easy to do so. So you also have what's known as the pyramid texts, and those are in a couple other pyramids. They have a bunch of writings in there. And those are all texts that are spells for the pharaoh in the afterlife, according to the official explanation.
Wow.
And yeah, there are like all these like incantations and things for the pharaoh to do after he's dead to navigate the afterlife. And in my opinion, those were never meant for someone who is dead. Those are obviously meant for someone who is still alive and who had just, used these pyramids for their purpose. So that would be to enter the astral plane and was having an out-of-body experience. Those spells and all that instruction were for how to navigate this other dimension, basically. And yeah, if you think about it, the pharaohs themselves, they were the intermediaries. So who's to say they weren't going to the pyramids, having out-of-body experiences, and then talking to beings, like in the other dimension, like that were their gods. We have to consider the fact that their gods could have been very, very that did not exist in the physical dimension. They existed in the astral dimension.
Exactly, man. Exactly.
The
This kind of
pharaohs
reminds me of
would-
what. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, yeah, the pharaohs therefore would be the only people who had this direct access to these beings. Think about it like that.
Yeah. Well, this definitely transforms the way that we could think about what's called prophecy, or like these pharaohs who, you know, if you take a more materialistic perspective, and if you're not someone who's really aware of the astral realm, then yeah, it does sound kind of delusional that they're getting instructions or advice or guidance from beyond. But anyone who has had experience with psychedelics or altered states, like, it doesn't even require quote unquote substances, you know. I know that Alex Jones had mentioned one time on Joe Rogan's podcast, really funny episode with Eddie Bravo. I think he was there, and he was talking about the elites, the quote unquote elites, using substances like DMT to contact interdimensional beings, to have conversations, or to, you know, to plan things out, you know, things like that. And it seems like if you think about what the pyramids are doing to people's frequencies, their brain waves, it's the although it is like, it could be an artificially induced state, it's just you know, a different means to that same goal of traveling to the astral realm to communicate with beings.
Yeah, the thing about the Egyptians also, like, it's in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. They knew a lot about, like, they had the Ka, the Ba, that's like the soul, the like soul body. Like, they knew all about this whole knowledge that we, like, our modern science, like, we're still debating, like, if like near-death experiences are real. Like, our best scientists can't give us an answer just yet. And you know, that would imply that the ancient Egyptians, they had this figured out on a whole other level. Like, they were out there, like, traveling there at will. They knew how to induce one of these states artificially, or using one of these structures without using, well, I mean, who knows? Maybe they did use some psychedelics to help with the experience.
Could be. But yeah, but it sounds like the structure itself was designed for the same purpose, or would help them get to the same place.
People want to talk about, like, how advanced the Egyptians were. They had this all figured out. Our modern scientists have no clue about any of this stuff. Like, we have no idea. Like, we don't even, like, accept that let's say the near-death experience or astral plane is even real at this point. But I'm here to tell you guys, anyone who's experienced this for themselves knows it's real.
Yeah,
it's definitely distinct experience from a dream.
Right.
I've done it just maybe once or twice in my life, completely, like, non-willed. Like, it's been one of those things where you wake up out of a dream, and people will say, "Oh, yeah, that's just a lucid dream." No, I've had a lucid dream. Like, a lucid dream is still a dream.
Right.
It's like you're in this projection from your subconscious mind. Once the dream is done, like, the dream images stop, you actually, and your body is asleep and your mind is awake. That's when you actually can see what's there. And that's when you have the potential to have an out-of-body experience.
Yeah, man.
And it's a real experience. Like, it's as real as right now talking to you. Like, there's no comparison to a dream.
It's hard to distinguish for sure. Well, what I would say, Ben, is that I would love to have you back on to dive into this, because you've opened up a whole nother door that I didn't expect to have revealed to us, which is, you know, the near-death experiences, the astral projection, the out-of-body experiences. And, you know, if you've never listened to the Skeptical podcast with Alex Sakaris, I think I'm saying his last name right, Skeptico, he has a lot of great research and interviews with people who have had near-death experiences, and I would definitely recommend you check it out, or anyone listening who wants to learn more about NDEs. It's a very fascinating subject.
Cool.
And
it is.
As a means of wrapping up, dude, I want to thank you so much. You, as Sam Tripoli says, you dropped the hammer of the gods, and this was really cool. I was very chilled at certain points. My dog is sleeping over there, he was like yelping out. I think he was having like some kind of dream.
Oh,
And then
man.
my phone's alarm went off because I'm a careless idiot. So I apologize for that, but editing is magical, man. So we're gonna make this sound nice and good for our listeners. But anyways, as a means of wrapping up, Ben, I have one last question for you, and it's our ritual final question. So if you could think back to any time, whether that was who you were yesterday or your past self from last year or last decade, however far back you want to go, if you could imagine for yourself, Ben, that your past self needed some kind of advice or some kind of guidance, and you can go back and give them some kind of help, what would you say to your past self?
Oh man, that's a good question. You kind of caught me off guard with it. Shoot. Man, here's the thing. I'm still figuring everything out. Like I don't think I'm really qualified to give anyone like the answers or even give anyone like advice. Like I don't know. I'm still in the learning process about a lot of stuff myself. So I would just say keep an open mind and follow your heart. I guess that sounds cliche, but
No, not at all.
that's all I can really say. I'm not really qualified in any way to give people advice how to live their life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's totally
mean-
fine, man. Yeah, that's the beauty of giving your past self advice, is that we just reflect on our personal journey, and that in and of itself is very powerful. If we do keep our minds open, if we listen to our heart and our intuition and our gut, they will lead us exactly where we're supposed to go. So I want to thank you again for being here, Ben. And can you remind us, I'm going to go on Amazon and buy a copy of your book. What is the title of your book? Where can we find you on social media? Can you give us all of that good stuff, please, before we wrap up?
Yeah, social media, look up Anomaly Hunter X. That's my handle across every platform. And go on to Amazon and type in my name, Ben Tejada-Ingram, or if you can't spell that, type in The Last Dinosaur of the Lost World. It's available. And that's how to find me. So thank you, Jake, for having me on your podcast.
Pleasure's all mine, man. You are welcome back
Shows.
anytime. Ben Tejada-Ingram. You can find his book, The Lost Dinosaur of the Lost World, or The Last Dinosaur of the Lost World. That was it, right?
Yeah.
The Last Dinosaur of the Lost World. I love that. Bit of a tongue twister, but it's a lot of fun. And I
Yes.
really enjoyed learning about this area in Venezuela. I'm excited to dive into your book. You're the first author that I've ever interviewed, so I feel terrible that I didn't read it, but I would love to have you back on. We can dig into some more near-death experience, out-of-body, astral, all those fun
Absolutely.
topics.
It's an
And-
important subject that people who study UFOs, like in particular, it drives me crazy. I'll just end by saying this. A lot of times in the UFO world, people now are talking more and more like UFOs are interdimensional, or these aliens are interdimensional beings. They're coming here from some other dimension. We have no idea what they are. And I would say these people are people that need to study the out-of-body experience, near-death phenomenon, and astral projection as well, because there's actually a ton we know about this, and it is 100% connected to UFOs. Like, it has to be.
Right on.
Yeah, something that people kind of like sleep on and don't really
Yeah.
connect the dots, but they need to. For
Well,
sure.
you've given people a lot to follow up on, a lot of breadcrumbs, and a great reminder that it is all within us. This potential is all within us. So I thank you for that reminder, and I appreciate you coming on here, and looking forward to chatting with you again, man. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd love to keep on talking.
All right, sounds good, man. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks for being here, man. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
Well, it's good to see you on the outro to episode 16 of the Loco Listens podcast with Benjamin Tejada-Ingram, the author of The Last Dinosaur of the Lost World. And wow, what a cool show, because first of all, Ben is a really nice guy. He is full of information as well. It's really cool. We barely scratched the surface. I'm sure that we could go on for hours. So we're gonna have to come back on and do another episode, maybe a couple, maybe a dozen, we'll see. But Ben, thank you so much, man. This was so much fun, and I'm really looking forward to reading your book. I've got it ordered on Amazon. It should be arriving in a couple days, and I feel like I've committed the cardinal sin of podcasting, which is to not read the author's book. But to be fair, I wasn't really aware. I just heard him talking about some really cool dinosaur-esque topics on the Expanding Reality podcast, but didn't really catch the part where he wrote a book. So really looking forward to diving in there, and I'm sure I'll have a lot to say once I am finished. Now, with the Egyptian conversation, this is very fascinating to me. Really been focused on why the pyramids were built, not necessarily how, because I don't think we're ever going to learn how. Maybe, but thinking about why. And Ben brought up some really interesting ideas about transporting the soul out of the body, doing some kind of ritual, even while someone was alive. So they're not necessarily tombs like we were led to believe. But anyways, enough of my ramblings. I really just want to thank you guys for being here on the outro, for listening to Ben, and for supporting both of us by just being here. And I appreciate all of you listening to the Loco Listens podcast. So let me leave you with our ritual message to the end of the show once and for all. Wherever you are, be here, be now, and be you. Adios.